So, The Zone of Interest is the latest film from Jonathan Glazer, who we haven't seen Jonathan Glazer in a while. Like, the last film he directed was Under the Skin from 10 years ago, which I absolutely loved that film. So I was greatly looking forward to seeing what he was going to do based on this book about the Holocaust from Martin Amis. And this is a very intriguing subject matter, because this is a film all about a Nazi commandant who lives with his family in this, nice house with a great backyard, and it's got a pool, and they can raise their kids there, and they got some decent help there, and it feels like their kids can grow up in a good environment. The only issue, the issue you'll immediately notice is that they are directly next to a concentration camp. So every day, dad goes off to work at the concentration camp, where he's trying to find the best way to eradicate Jews in the most effective way possible, while there's gunshots and screaming and pain and torture just outside their windows of the home of Commandant Rudolf Haas and his family. Rudolf Haas is played by Christian Friedel, who does a great job playing this very, very quiet performance of a man who tries to remain kind of, tries to remain reserved in the work that he's doing, and try not to let it kind of spill out into his home life. Because what's most fascinating about this film is that we see this film almost entirely from the perspective of the Haas family, and within their house, which is brilliantly shot with these kind of a lot of these shots that feel like we're getting a lot more depth in this house, where it kind of feels like we're trapped in this environment. And then, with great audio design here, where the family just goes about their normal day-to-day lives, they read books, they do chores, they have meals together, they have little parties, they have they play in the pool outside, they have plants that they tend to, and they tend to their little baby, and then just often not too far distance, there's people screaming, there's people dying, there's gunshots, there's smoke coming up from the incinerators where they're destroying people, and they're just trying to not think about it. Like, it's just, it's like for, people who would live next to a freeway, they treat it like a dull roar. And it's, and you look at that and your human reaction is this is horrifying. How could you live next to this? And that's kind of the horror of this film, is that, there's all this inhumanity going just next door. Like, you can see the smoke from the incinerators right from their window. You can hear everything. You can hear the guards talking to people they're shooting. You can see the children overhearing it from the window, and they treat it like it's just another day, just another normal day, and that the few elements of horror that do come about are kind of shooed away quickly. Like, at one point, Rudolph takes his children down to the river to kind of play, and then he realized that, the river actually has a little bit of spillover from, the dead bodies, from the concentration camp. So he kind of quickly ushers his kids out of the river very quickly before they can notice anything. Even though, it feels like this thing he's trying to keep his children away from as much of this as possible, even though, there's only so long that you can do this. There's only so long before, they're going to figure out what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's just, there's this grotesque undercurrent to it all. Where it's the most sobering moment is when, is when the grandmother for the children comes to stay with them for a bit, and she loves their house, she loves the way their backyard looks and everything, but the more that she stays, the more that she comes to recognize the torture and the gunfire and the incinerations that are going on right next door to the concentration camp, and she's horrified. This is probably normal for Rudolph and his kin, but not for Grandma. Grandma like pretty much just leaves unannounced after like a night there. It's like, no, I, you can probably deal with this, but no, I'm not gonna stay here. I also really loved the performance by Rudolph's wife, Hedwig, played by Sandra Hüller. And I love her performance because, like, while Rudolph is kind of trying to maintain his family unit, Hedwig is trying to do the same thing, but she's like very forceful about it. Like at one point, like the conflict here is that Rudolph has been reassigned, like he's got to, attend to, other Nazi business at a different base. And basically Hedwig wants to like stay behind with the children because she doesn't want to give up on this paradise that she's established for herself. And you would think, if you're being relocated, you might be, because they're right next door to Auschwitz. You would think that, it might be better for her children not to grow up next to a concentration camp. But that's part of the problem, is that they've grown so used to this scenario and grown almost accustomed to, putting up with all the gunfire and the screaming to, justify this paradise that they've made for themselves. You spend enough time with them, but you're also like, you recognize like these people are inhuman in the way that they are willingly ignoring all this just so that they feel they can have this peaceful family life. And what I love so much about Glazer's direction of this is that there's a lot of moments of contemplation where we're given moments to just kind of like sit with ourselves and try to question, how much of this we want to remain, that you want to remain as passive. In particular, I like the way that the film begins and ends with a little bit of like a music interlude and then just like sitting in like the darkness, just trying to, like understand, like, like how, like, more or less that silence would be like complacency within like this scenario, which the Haas family has pretty much kind of chosen in this scenario. Like there is like I do like how there is more aspects of horror that come about where there's a little bit of a side story where this Polish girl is shown in the darkness, kind of like secretly supplying food to the prison work sites for the concentration camp. And they're interestingly shot. They're kind of shot in like this kind of like black and white night vision, while this very foreboding music plays to kind of like show you how even someone who's trying to like do the right thing is putting themselves at risk, and they're like, very close to being in the crosshairs of ending up dead in this scenario. And then you contrast that with like, like kind of like the day-to-day life of the Haas family, in which, the most concerning thing for them is like, do we have enough food for this event? Did the dog go to the bathroom on the floor? Do we got to clean that up? Do we need to make the beds? We got to read to the children. And there's always like, something that these characters are fighting back. They're trying to pretend that they have like a stable life, for being, a family of, a family of Nazis, trying to like believing that this is all normal, that this, just living next to a concentration camp is just, like the price you pay. It's just like they feel like, it's just like airplanes going over them. They're like, okay, we're on a flight path, big deal, but concentration camp. And I love how the film, one of the things I love most about the film is that when you get to the climax, and this might be a little bit of like a controversial ending for some people, but when you get to the very end of the film, you're watching as kind of Rudolph descends into darkness, and there's a big jump in the timeline where it skips immediately ahead to showcase on like the modern day Auschwitz, which has been transformed into a museum. So like there's this big contrast between what went down at Auschwitz and how we view it now. And what's fascinating is, jumping between that is like the one thing we never see is we never get to see the horrors that went inside, that went down inside Auschwitz. You are not shown like the torture and the violence and the horror and the bloodshed, even though you hear it. You can hear it. You can see like the smoke coming up, but you never see any of the details of it. So and then immediately after that, the film just cuts to black and just, puts on the music and lets you sit there for a moment and think about, how much of this atrocity do you recognize if you're not there and seeing it? Because like one of the fascinating things I love about films that are, that try to be historical dramas is that they try to bring history to life. Whenever I saw like war films where they showed like the grotesque bloodshed and the loss of life, it made it feel real and gruesome and visceral. And there has been films about the Holocaust to that same degree as well. But Zone of Interest becomes more fascinating because it dares to ask, when you don't see everything, but it's there. You can hear it, you can sense it, you can imagine it in your mind, and it's just treated with passivity. Because like the stuff they show at the modern day Auschwitz Museum is just the staff cleaning it, just maintaining it, just like it's there, it's silent, and we just maintain this portion of history. But there's still that questioning of how much of that weight do you feel when you don't see it, like when you're just hearing accounts of it, especially like within Zone of Interest, when it's treated with people who just treated it like a very just passive thing, like where the one thing they were concentrated most on is how can this device and how can this operation kill as many Jewish people as possible. With that passivity, do you recognize the horror in all that? And it's a question that the film kind of silently poses to the audience, the way that it ramps up to, that ending where, like I said, it cuts to black and it just punches you in the gut at that moment to realize, you've just watched a Holocaust movie where you're not actually shown the victims, and you've just shown the aggressors and the people who did nothing during all of this, and you've only gotten like a brief glimpse of people who were a little bit of allies in it, or more or less recognize the horror, and it forces you to kind of like question, like, how much, do we recognize and how much do we feel about this when other people felt nothing. And just on that level, the film is just so fascinating to that degree. It's not a comfortable experience, but in terms of trying to make you feel something for everything that went down with the Holocaust, I think Glazer kind of nails it here. It's a very profound film.